Here we go for my first national park review. Olympic was my 39th U.S. national park and my first in the great state of Washington. This was a top park left on my list that I was dying to visit, and I finally got the opportunity over Memorial Day weekend in 2023. There are 5 sections that I'll go in depth on for this park and share my overall score for the end, and you can decide if it's worth your time and money to visit. I am hoping to complete all 63 parks before I turn 30 and plan to review each one eventually. I wanted to start this video off with the variety of Olympic because I'm not sure there's another park in the system like this one. It has big, beautiful mountains with glaciers that experience all 4 seasons, which even includes a small ski resort at Hurricane Ridge. There are coastal beaches, rainforests, waterfalls, and hot springs. There are opportunities to see a wide range of wildlife depending on the time of year, including whales, tide pools for sea life, to Roosevelt elk and bears in the mountains and forests. The park is extremely large, and with no through roads through the park, drive times can be long, but it makes each section diverse. Rain clouds get backed up on the mountains like traffic and make the Hoh Rainforest one of the rainiest places on Earth, while just over the mountain in the rain shadow, there is less than half as much rain per year. Olympic is the 5th largest national park in the lower 48, and it deserves at least 3 full days to cover the highlights of each area. If you stick to the busiest spots in the park, your chances of seeing wildlife will go down significantly, but the more secluded you get, and depending on the time of day, the higher your luck will be. I had never heard of tide pools before planning my trip to Olympic and found out they're one of the most popular things to do and see. Lining up your schedule with low tide at certain beaches while fitting so many other sightseeing can be tricky, but here are some of the best tide pools in the area to see colorful sea life. On the southern coast strip near Claylock, Beach 4 had a great, more secluded area, and Mora's Hole in the Wall is a very scenic but popular spot during low tide, and one that we missed, but we still saw at high tide, and it's worth visiting at any time. Shipwreck Point on the road to Cape Flattery was off the beaten path with a ton of pools and hardly any people around. One that we didn't have time to visit, but was on my list, was Tongue Point, close to Port Angeles, just outside of the park boundaries as well. With so much to see, we didn't get too off the beaten path on our first trip, so we only had one elk encounter in the rainforest and caught an eagle while kayaking. But I know you can spot whales migrating on the Strait of Juan de Fuca in the Pacific Ocean in the spring and fall months. You'll most likely spot bears, marmots, elk, and eagle in the forests and mountains. We backcountry camped on Rialto Beach, and during our 1-mile hike in the dark, we came across 3 to 4 critters while the waves were crashing at high tide, which was pretty creepy because all we could see were their eyes, and we had no idea what they were. The entire Olympic Peninsula could be part of the national park, but it is home to over 100,000 people and shares land with Native Americans. It is only 2 to 3 hours from Seattle, and since there are no through roads in the park, certain areas like the Hoh Rainforest and Hurricane Ridge can get extremely backed up with lines at entrances, getting up to 2 hours anytime from 10 to 5 on weekends and 9 to 6 on holidays in the summertime. You won't have any idea either until after about 25 minutes of driving down a dead-end road. I enjoy going to visitor centers and wanted to come before 5, but I'm glad I didn't, as there was a 25-minute wait at around 6:30 on Memorial Day weekend. There is limited parking, and the trails will become conga lines as well, so it isn't really worth arriving between 10 to 5 most summer days. You also don't need much time in the Hoh Rainforest unless you're doing big miles on the Hoh River Trail, and if that's the case, you'll likely be starting early in the morning anyway. On the coast, with its public access off the Pacific Coast Highway, it doesn't really feel like you're in the national park despite its beauty. There's plenty of space to spread out and enjoy the beach, but the main sites like Tree of Life and Ruby Beach will be busy any time of the day, and it was pretty rare to see any rangers or anyone looking after the beaches. If crowds bother you, you should try to visit the 3 most popular areas, Hurricane Ridge, Hoh Rainforest, and Ruby or Rialto Beach, in the morning or evening if possible, or even try alternative areas like Ozette or Shishi Beach on the coast or Staircase in the southeast during peak hours. The campsites also book up far in advance, but be on the lookout for openings 4 days and 2 weeks before your visit if you're a late planner. You usually can get wilderness camping if you're running low on options, which run about the same price, and they just require some short hikes. They do offer less facilities, but they have more seclusion. The coast ended up being my favorite part of the park. Every beach had something different to offer and was unique with sea stacks or tide pools. My favorites were Ruby Beach, Claylock Beach, Second Beach, aka the Twilight Beach, and Rialto Beach. The Hoh Rainforest was amazing, but not quite up to the high expectations I had coming in. There are only 3 main trails, the Hall of Mosses, which will be by far the most popular, with a couple very standout spots you always see on Instagram, while the Spruce Nature Trail had a good variety with more water and less people. The Hoh River Trail runs 17 miles one way to a glacier in the mountains. It's It's not quite as green as I thought it would be, but it's still very unique to this area and a must-see. The Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center burned down during renovations a couple weeks before our visit, which was extremely unfortunate, but gave us another reason to come back as there's still plenty to do, even after spending 3 jam-packed days. We could still see the peaks and some of the falls nearby, but from the pictures I've seen, it's a nice and wide open area with great mountain views, which contrasts from most of the park. The Lake Crescent and Soul Duck roads are very busy but very beautiful. Soul Duck was my favorite waterfall in the park, and the hot springs at the lodge was an amazing way to end a long day of hiking. You can even take a cold plunge in the pool. If you base yourself at Lake Crescent Lodge, you can see Mary Mare Falls, Old Growth Rainforest, and Mount Storm King on one long trail. Mount Storm King was a brutal 4,000-foot elevation gain hike that offers almost no scenery until the very top when you use ropes to reach the peak. The ropes and the view make the effort worth it, as you can see into Canada on a clear day. At the base, you can also rent kayaks here or across the lake to get into the crystal clear glacial water. We paddled the Devil's Punch Bowl and back, and it was another great change of pace from hiking. The Staircase and Quinault regions in the south are pretty far from the main attractions, but still worthy of visits. The Lake Quinault Lodge was probably my favorite in the park, while Staircase was very secluded with towering mountain views and a bridge crossing over a fast-flowing river. Olympic is very accessible, which can be a good or bad thing, as you might know from other parks. With so many people living close by and a major city and airport within 2 to 3 hours, traffic can be a hassle and ignorant tourists can be a distraction from the sights. The bonus is, for the people that live in the region and want to visit often, they can easily do so and have endless possibilities to explore in the park. The weather was as good as we could have asked for on our trip, but I know it can vary greatly depending on the time of year. The coast and lower elevations stay pretty mild year-round and rarely see snow, but also doesn't see much sun. Obviously, it sees a ton of rain. The mountains can be sunnier in the summer and filled with snow in the winter. The climate is great for hiking, as you generally won't ever be too hot or too cold. Accommodations are pretty flexible depending on what you're looking for. We pretty much always camp on park trips, but they do have multiple lodges available, even on holidays if you have a more flexible budget and you don't like to camp. Camping spots at all major areas book up far in advance. On our visit, we weren't able to get a site at the Mora campground, but had a fine trade-off of backcountry camping at Rialto Beach. On our second night, since Fairholme was booked, we stayed in the National Forest just before the Soul Duck Road with no trouble. You can also stay in numerous cities around the park like Port Angeles or Forks. That leads me into some sites worth visiting outside of the park boundaries, but places you'll probably run across anyway. In Nia Bay, the furthest northwest point in the US is Cape Flattery. It's on an Indian reservation, otherwise it would be a beautiful addition to the park, joining Shishi Beach just south. This area gets very busy, but it can accommodate a lot of people on the trail. They have an interesting museum in town, as well as it is a pretty drive along the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Keep your eye out for tide pools and whales. In between the coast and the rainforest is Forks, which is famous from Twilight, and it's worth a stop even if you're not a fan of the movies. My dad has never watched one of the movies, but insisted on seeing all the sites in the movie that they were based off of. They have some fun memorabilia and had their Sasquatch Days Festival going on while we were in town. Port Angeles is the gateway to Hurricane Ridge, as well as a port for Americans to visit Victoria, BC. I haven't been there yet, but I'm very much looking forward to going. Port Townsend was another town we didn't have time to visit, but I've heard very good things about their downtown and state parks in the northeast corner of the peninsula. Last, in the Staircase region, the High Steel Bridge is a short drive out of your way if you're heading back to the city. Also, a good number of visitors will be coming from Seattle, and it has a million things to do there, and is one of my favorite cities in the country. I had top 5 expectations for this park coming in, and although it wasn't quite everything I had hoped for, it was still an amazing park, and out of the 41 parks that I've been to so far, it sits in my top 10. It has some of the most variety in the system, with amazing scenery and a wide range of wildlife, although difficult to spot in some of the popular areas. The weather is very mild, which can be good or bad depending on your preference. It has plenty of accommodation options and is incredibly accessible, but that also leads to its biggest downfall with the crowds. Olympic is the top 10 most visited park in the US, and for good reason, but it definitely takes away from some of the scenery and sights when you're having to sit in lines or you want to find solitude and you just can't. Overall, I give this park an 8.5 out of 10, and I'll have my criteria listed. If you have any questions or comments below, or what should I review next, please subscribe if you found this helpful, and I hope you enjoyed.